always be honest with your children. And the more honest you are, the quicker your children can heal and start moving on with their own lives.
Yeah.
Now, it's still going to be painful for them, but yet the knowing gives a sense of like solitude because there's no more wondering.
Yeah, you feel like you're going into a rabbit hole where things get dark and it's like you get sad. And it's not like a regular sad. It's kind of like the sad, well, I guess it's the depression side where you don't want to do anything. Welcome, Linwood Unified School District families, to another episode of Beyond the Classroom. As we get close to ending the school year, we wanted to talk about a topic that is kind of near and dear to our hearts right now, and it's not an easy topic. And you guys already know Sarah Barnes, our licensed clinical social worker supervisor for Linwood Unified School District. And I asked her to be on this podcast to kind of help me and anyone else that has faced the loss of a loved one. As you guys know, Linwood Unified has faced some sad times with the loss of our beloved deputy superintendent. And it's something that is very difficult. I want to say that I feel like I've been blessed that I haven't had someone close to my life pass away. But the passing of someone that you're so close to, it's a hard topic. And I invited Sarah Barnes here today to kind of help us process that and kind of talk about the stages and the different things that we go through as people. So today we will be discussing understanding grief and loss and what that does to us as people. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Sarah, for coming.
Thank you.
So let's get right to it, unless there's something you want to share before we start.
Well, I know we were going to discuss the stages, but before we enter into that, I wanted to just kind of unpack what grief is.
Okay.
And talk about that for a moment, because it could get very confusing to combine grief and mourning, and they're different. They're not the same thing. So I think it's important for everybody to understand during this conversation the difference between grieving and mourning.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because as you're saying it, I'm like, isn't it the same thing?
No, it's not. They're connected, but they're not the same.
Okay.
So grief basically is the anguishment that is experienced by anybody who's experiencing a loss. And grief is not just for the death of a loved one, but it's the death of all losses. So whether somebody has died, they lose a marriage through divorce, there's a breakup, so loss of a relationship, somebody who loses their employment, so there's loss of professional relationships, loss of finances, loss of benefits. So grief is the umbrella that covers all losses. And grief is actually something that, and this is how it's differentiated from mourning, grief is what's happening inside of you. So grief is not usually seen to anybody by the naked eye. So you could be in like the depths of grief and nobody would ever know it. But mourning, it's the outward expression of that grief. So mourning is when you're able to feel and show those feelings. So you're externalizing the pain of grief.
Oh, wow.
But when you look at Western society and how we tend to operate, we tend to personalize the grief because it's so unique and so personal to the person that's grieving. And we rarely will show the acts of mourning as in other cultures. Because in our society, it's, okay, let's hide the mourning and let's hide our grieving and let's just move on. Like we can't like show all of that. You know, we got to go to work the next day. We got to parent, and we have responsibilities and duties to execute. So oftentimes we hide the mourning and we don't receive the support that is necessary for the mourning. And oftentimes we mask what we're going through and we hide our grief anyways. That can't be seen by anybody. So you could come to work and you could look well and nobody could know that you are experiencing grief, because grief is so personal to you and it's done to you inside, things that you carry that nobody could see, but people could only see your mourning. But when we are in these positions, we tend to come to work and hide the mourning. And that's the only expression that people can see. That is confirmation that you are grieving.
Got it. So I could still be grieving even if you guys aren't seeing my mourning.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So it's important to separate those two and understand it, because we tend to mask our mourning and we hide it.
And for those people that aren't that used to the terminology mask, what does that mean?
To cover up, to not show, to conceal. So with grieving is deep despair, right? And anguishment and sadness. And that often results in maybe a lot of tearfulness, maybe screaming, yelling, crying, sleepless nights. But we don't bring that oftentimes into the workplace, or we even hide it in our own homes. And that's why I think it's important to understand that, because we could feel confused, like, why am I feeling this kind of way? And oftentimes it's because we're hiding our pain and we don't even know that we're doing that.
Yeah. And as parents, I think we do that a lot because we want to protect our kids. We don't want our kids to see us sad.
Right.
Or we don't want to get them sad.
Right.
So I don't know if this is going to be part of the stages, but what happens when we don't address those feelings, or when we do mask them? Are there like long-term effects, or?
There are definitely. There's a saying that whatever you resist persists. So like a wound that is not treated properly becomes an infection, right? An infection becomes an illness. So it's the same thing when we're not dealing with our grief and our sadness, and we're avoiding it and not confronting it, and not even allowing ourselves to sit in the pain of our loss, which we'll talk about through the stages. It could have paralyzing effects long term, or it becomes complicated grief that could turn into anxiety and long term debilitating depression. Wow. So it does have those effects when we're not grieving and dealing with our emotional pain.
Well, let's get to the stages. What does that look like, and what is the process?
Okay, so there was a researcher, a psychiatrist, her name is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she has a book on death and dying. And so she was doing research and studying individuals who knew they were dying, and the families that were going to experience to be impacted by the death of a loved one. So in her work, she discovered that there were 5 common stages for like all human beings and what we experience when we experience the death of a loved one. And these phases, as I explain it, it's going to be in a linear form, but it's not experienced straightforward. You could experience all 5 stages straightforward, or you could experience them overlapping or out of order, or you could only experience maybe 1 or 2 steps of the 5. So it's not like set in stone that you're going to go through all 5 stages.
Okay.
But normally, most people will experience all the 5 phases, even if it's not in that straightforward fashion. So the first stage, it's called denial. Denial is when a person experiences the death of a loved one, and they experience what is known as shock, disbelief that this incident has happened. They even experience maybe feelings of numbness. So the second stage that follows denial is anger. And anger is just that natural human emotion that we all have. But in this case, it's a more of a raw anger, where one feels that life is just cruel, life is unfair, and it's kind of backed up by that question of like, why? Like, why him, or why her, why me? So in the place of anger, you could really feel overwhelmed with confusion and even some agitation and irritability. The third phase, it's the bargaining phase. So this is the phase where you haven't accepted the loss yet, and you're still feeling overwhelmed. And this is where you're beginning to make deals with yourself. And if you're a religious person, you may even attempt to negotiate with God. This is the what if, the coulda, shoulda phase. What if I did this differently? He would probably still be alive. What if I tried this differently? She would probably be alive. And sometimes it's this wishing to change what has happened, even though logically you know you can't. But when you're in the stage of bargaining emotionally, you still have that sense of maybe I could bring my loved one back. And so you're kind of making deals with yourself, or with God to make the results different, the outcome different. The fourth phase is depression. And this isn't just sadness, this is overwhelming sadness, a deep sense of pain, despair, that anguish feeling. This is where the pain just feels very overwhelming. And you could stay stuck in this phase for many months and even years if you resist the emotional pain and don't process it and don't work on it. So it's important that you don't stay stuck in the phase of depression. That's where it could become complicated grief. The last stage is acceptance. This is when an individual, they're shifting from the overwhelming sense of emotional pain where the pain is beginning to ease. This is where like maturing grief takes place, where you could turn your grief from pain into like a grief of love, where you're able to celebrate the person's memories. You can honor them by learning how to live again and create a new norm now, where you are celebrating their memories, maybe the anniversary dates, things that you guys did together, but it's that emotional pain that's tied to their death. It's no longer disabling anymore. So when you get to the stage of acceptance, it's being able to take next steps, and you're more like on even footing now. And you are able to create like a thriving, successful life with this in their absence.
So some basic questions that I think people would ask is, how long does it take to get to the mature part, which is the last stage?
Yeah. So with grief and loss work, there's no timeline. Like society will tell you like, oh, you should be over this in a couple months or a couple weeks. But everybody grieves at different paces. And that's the most important piece, is to show yourself that compassion and to recognize that your grief is unique to you. Even for siblings, for example, because nobody grieves the same way. And if the set of siblings lost a parent, they're not going to grieve the same way, and they're not going to grieve for the same amount of time. So one person could grieve for a week or 1 month. Another person could grieve for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. When we look at grief, I would say healthy grieving is maybe 2 years, but it's a soft 2 years. It's not like a rigid, you should be done grieving after 2 years. There's a grief expert. His name is David Kessler, and he asks his clients, well, when they ask him that question, how long will I grieve for? And his response is, well, how long will your loved one be dead for? Because if they're dead, they're probably going to be dead a long time. So grief can't continue throughout your entire lifespan. But mature grief is where we want to be. Because if my son were to die or somebody I love die, I'm never going to stop grieving my child. But I'm going to go from the grief of pain into a grief of love for my son. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so there's no timeline for grieving. What's the concern is if you're not grieving, it becoming complicated grief. That's the major concern, not the question of like, how long will I grieve for? Because there is no timeline. Early grief, there's different phases. And the acute phase could be like 6 months, 9 months. But when you look at early grieving, you're looking at least a minimum of 2 years where you could kind of feel like, okay, I'm finding my footing again and creating my new norm. But when it comes to grief for somebody that you had this connection with, or let's say it's a complicated loss, like death by suicide, death by overdose, death that was unexpected, like you didn't have closure, you didn't know this person was going to die. That kind of complicated grief is where, even though you're going to grieve for a long time, it's going to require a different type of support network, a stronger support network.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's where we're at a little bit, where it's kind of like, I don't even know what stage this is, where it's, I guess, still shock. Does shock last a long time?
Absolutely. And that's where all of these different stages, they could intertwine and they could overlap. Like one moment you could be in the stage of depression, and then 2 weeks later you could be back in the stage of grief. In the stage of denial. Like, did this really happen? Are they really gone? And that could last a long time, and then you could go back into the stage of bargaining, like what could I have done differently? So it can last a long time, and they overlap and they intertwine.
Yeah.
And that's why grief, if you're not dealing with it and processing it and bringing it to the level of awareness, of like conscious awareness, and you're getting lost in the grief, that's where you get stuck.
Yeah, you feel like you're going into a rabbit hole where things get dark, and it's like you get sad, and it's not like a regular sad. It's kind of like the sad. Well, I guess it's the depression side where you don't want to do anything, but then you gotta kind of like snap out of it, and. But I think you're right. I mean, I know you're right in the sense of that it goes in different ways. Like I used to hear that where people would say they come in waves.
Yes.
But I didn't understand it until you experience it.
Yeah, it comes in waves for months and years to come. And you use the word snap out of it, and that's one thing we don't want to do. That goes back to the old ways of doing things, of move on, get over it. You should just like let that person go already. If we interrupt the grieving process, then we'll continue to grieve in a way that's not productive or healthy. And so the question really is taking a look at the emotions of grief, that all the emotions that like flood us. What is this grief teaching me? What is the grief telling me about myself? What do I need to know in this moment when the grief is overwhelming you? And that's very personal. Like it's going to be different for everybody. Yeah. But the takeaway from grief is it could take you deeper into understanding yourself, understanding like meaning and purpose for yourself in life, as well as it could deepen how your understanding of everybody else that's suffering around you and what they're going through and their own losses.
So, okay, we don't interrupt it, we let it happen, but what do we do while we're going through it? And sometimes we're maybe like, we don't even know what to do to understand it. You know, what is that? Like, just give it time, or?
Yeah, I mean, the old saying is time heals all wounds, and that's not necessarily true, because if you're not doing the work, how does the healing come?
Yeah. Right?
So time doesn't heal, but it's your proactiveness and your being intentional in your healing process. So one is having your village of support, having somebody that, almost like an eyewitness account. Something that we do in therapy is we encourage corrective emotional experiences.
Corrective emotional experiences.
Yeah. So having somebody who, for example, let's say as a child I was badly mistreated by somebody, and then as an adult, that wound from my past is flooding me in my adulthood, and it's hurting me. Maybe because I had people in my life who minimized that pain, that incident, that experience. Oh, no, they didn't do anything to you, but really it could have been like maybe abusive. A healthy adult in my life would I see your pain, I see that you're hurting, something did happen to you and it was bad. That corrective emotional experience brings some healing. So is somebody saying, I validate what you went through. I validate what you're experiencing now. I validate your pain. So when we have that eyewitness to say, you lost this person that meant so much to you, and they could sit with you in your pain, that in and of itself is healing. But it's not like a one-time moment of healing. It's an ongoing experience. So one is your support network, having somebody that you trust, that you could open up to, that will even let you just be yourself if you're in the throes of being quiet or isolating yourself, or if you are ready to open up, something that's just sensitive to where you're at in the process of your grief. What I do, since my son's dad died, is I write him. To this day, I'll still write him letters. Some moments it's like, I'm so angry you're gone. I cannot believe you're gone. How, like, why did you do this to us? Why did you leave us? And other moments it's, I miss you. I just miss hearing your voice talking to our son and you cracking jokes with our son. It's called externalization. When you're getting it out of your body, it helps to, one, validate your emotions and your experiences. You're not minimizing it. You're acknowledging that it's there. And over time, the more you do that, the pain begins to ease, right? Other people, they will write letters and they might burn the letter and throw it in the trash as like a symbolic ritual of healing. I also listen to podcasts. I will search like information on grief and loss. Pick up a book. Meditation is a huge one, especially people of a faith-based background that tap into their spirituality and their relationship with God. Those are moments that are very sacred, that could bring healing. But it can't be like a one-time solution. It's an ongoing engagement with your pain. And sometimes you might have to shelf that pain, just like you're reading a book. Like if I'm at work, I'm like, man, I'm feeling so overwhelmed, and I'm acknowledging that it's there. I don't want to resist that it's there, but maybe I have things I have to get done, right? Because life for everybody else has gone on. I have to learn, right, to get my responsibilities done, because life still goes on for me too. But it's important to discern when the right moment is to put it on the shelf and to take the book back off. You know how you take a book back off? Like when you're reading it, okay, I'm going to put this down for a little while. I'm going to put it on the shelf, and I'm going to get back to it. That's what we sometimes have to do with our emotions. Put it on the shelf, but don't ignore it, and don't pretend that it's not there. Make sure you return to it, because you have to honor the pain so that the pain over time could ease its way outside of your body.
One of the things that I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard it too, is when people say, like, you just learn to live with the new you, or the loss of that person. Like, you learn to live without them. Is that kind of like...
You do, but the question is are you living without them in a way that's healthy, or is it unhealthy? So that's when you get to the stage of acceptance, right? Learning to live with your new norm. It's having a limb that's no longer there anymore. How do you learn to live without that limb? A lot of people go to physical therapy or occupational therapist to learn how to live with maybe without their leg again, right? So emotionally, you had somebody that was a huge part of your life. They contributed to your life, some would say somehow. They meant so much to you, and now they're gone. So how do you pick up those pieces and learn to live again and create this new norm? And how you go about that through the stages of grief, it matters, right? So there's really no how to, but it's being sensitive to your pain and acknowledging that it's there, that you're unique, that nobody's going to understand your own pain because it's unique to you. And there's no worse pain than your own pain. You know how people compare, well, they went through that. No, my pain is worse. There's smaller pains, big pains, micro pains, macro pains. And we can't compare because everybody's pain is their worst pain for themselves. Right?
Absolutely.
And so, you can create a new norm, but it's being intentional in those steps without invalidating the moments where you missing that person comes up, and being able to sit in that and just honor that process.
So is it okay to ask you a question
Absolutely.
about your son? And so as parents that have gone through that, like we hear all the steps and everything that we need to go through as an adult, but how do we help our children process that? Two things. One, as you're going through it yourself, and then two, just to help them go through it. Like how does that look?
So for me, I had to be sensitive with knowing, one, that my son deserved to know the truth, and for his questions to be answered, but I couldn't throw everything all at him at one time. So the rule of thumb in the world of mental health is to live by transparency and honesty with your children. Children understand so much more than we give them credit for, and they suffer so much more because of our silence and what we don't share with them. And so what's important is you always use honesty at every phase of development, whether they're 2 or 10 or 20, and you're never going to lie to your child, but you're going to only share certain informational details based upon their emotional readiness, right? And so for my son, it was, he wanted to have the information early on as to like, well, how did my dad die? And for those of you who don't know, my son's father died by suicide in July 1st, 2024. And so I did explain to my son, I asked, did daddy die by suicide? Yes, baby, he did die by suicide. And then of course I had to explain some of the background information for him as to what potentially contributed to that. But then as a year later, not even a year later, we're talking about 9-10 months later, now he wants to know the details of it. Had I thrown all of the details in that I knew about the whole incident when he first received the news about his dad dying, I don't think it would have overwhelmed his whole being, his whole system.
Yeah.
So in bits and pieces, it's sharing with him the truth, always being honest from the get-go, but delivering and unpacking that information over time as he could receive it.
Yeah.
So we have to be sensitive that our kids can suffer by not knowing the truth. They'll sit with the questions, they'll sit with the wondering, they'll sit and suffer and ask, they'll feel like it's my fault. Children don't always understand, the larger amount of children, like even if it's a parent that dies from cancer, when people are not helping a child process their feelings with that loss, that kid can feel responsible for getting their parents sick.
Wow.
And so it's relating that information. Mijo, your mother had cancer and she did die, and it's not your fault. Her body became sick and her body couldn't live with the sickness inside her body anymore. And so it's important that parents don't become intimidated or scared of having these conversations. They think they're protecting their children, but when we're uncomfortable having these conversations with our children, we're actually protecting ourselves more than our children. And so it's building the confidence and recognizing the importance of, I need to tell my child the truth, but in a loving environment, in a confident yet loving and a soft tone with your child. Your whole body language and how you convey it, and when you convey it, down to even like what you're wearing and how you smell and where you're at, and when you share all this
because
information.
They're never going to forget that.
They're never going to forget that moment, and their life will never be the same, right? But always be honest with your children, and the more honest you are, the quicker your children can heal and start moving on with their own lives.
Yeah.
Now, it's still going to be painful for them, but yet the knowing gives a sense of like solitude because there's no more wondering. Yeah. Confusion could breed more harm than knowledge does.
Is there an age though that we're talking about? Like how young are we honest? Like how?
You're always honest from the get-go. So even like at 2 or 3 or 4, you might not use the word, for example, suicide with your child at 2 years old, but it would be something like, your daddy did die, and your dad's brain was ill, and the illness took his life, right? But the details of it that surround all of that, you don't convey right away. It's as they get older, and you would convey more details.
Got it. So you still tell them, it's how you say it.
You not that you're adding to the story, but you are giving more details to the narrative as they grow older to understand it.
And like for kids, if parents can't have those conversations, well, let's talk about here at the district office. Do we provide some of those resources for our families?
Absolutely. And so if it's hard for parents to have these conversations, you have multiple options. One, you could come speak with a mental health clinician here at Lynwood Unified School District, and or even outsource, right? Community agencies, group practices, private practice clinicians, and you could have like one-on-ones in your own therapeutic sessions where a therapist could train you and guide you in how to say these kind of hard, or to carry these hard conversations with your child. But even then, if that's still too hard for a parent to have these conversations, then bringing the family into the room with the therapist, and then the therapist could help guide that whole process with the parent present and the children present. So you don't have to do it alone.
Right. Have we done that here in Lynwood Unified?
Having these hard conversations. Yes, we have had hard conversations.
Yeah.
Absolutely, where we bring in parents. A student might be suffering with mental illness, panic attacks, anxiety. The parents, the child is too scared to talk to the parent and have these conversations with the parent. It's kind of like the same, but in reverse, right? And then bringing the parents in and with the child in there. This is what's happening with your child. They're scared to tell you, and educating the parent in that moment.
Yeah. And I know there's been a couple of situations where the social worker has been present when they tell one of our students that the parent has passed. So we're here to support.
Have had that. Yeah.
Is there any other tips that you would want to tell parents about grief and loss, or even us as adults? Like, I think for me personally, I think having compassion for ourselves goes a long way, because I think sometimes I'm like, why do I still feel this way?
Mm-hmm.
And like my husband has to remind me, like, this just happened. It's only
Right.
been a month.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very impactful month because, like you said, we remember where we were at when we heard the news, what we were wearing, what we were doing. And we look back and we're like, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes we want to rush through it,
Yeah.
especially people that are always wanting to move on. Like you
Yeah.
said, like snap out of it or whatever. We're just used to that.
Yeah.
So I think having compassion for ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about that.
Absolutely. And when I think of compassion, another word for compassion is, people don't like this word pity, but it's to have pity on yourself and to have pity on others. That's what compassion is. Compassion also means to suffer with someone else. And that's where the village matters. People who suffer with you and will be there for you. And there are some things I want to leave because normalizing the pain is the most important. So when we get called in to help families, let's say a mother passed away, and then it's like, okay, go help this family and go support this family, and it's recognizing, well, wait, let's pause because the pain is not even dry on the wall yet, and it's really challenging to do work with somebody that hasn't gone into the phase yet of the mature grieving. Because you're kind of like vacillating throughout all these different stages, the denial, the anger, the bargaining, and the depression. And if you get support, it's the support that is normalizing it, it's validating it, it's saying, I see you. But it's more difficult to do the work in those phases because your mind and your heart are not in sync, and your heart is trying to catch up to what your mind knows. And your mind understands that there's a loss, but man, there's this big divide between your heart and your mind when you're grieving, right? You have the logic there, but the heart doesn't experience the logic. And so it's important during that time period to do what you were talking about, the self-compassion. It just happened. And to recognize, it's the information that's empowering. Knowledge is power. To say, hey, you know what? I am angry today. I am depressed today. I'm angry at God. I want him to bring back my loved one. I'm feeling disbelief. I'm feeling nothing. I feel numbness today. And recognize that that's actually normal for a 2-year period. But after 2 years, if the pain isn't easing, that's the red flag. After 2 years, if they're not shifting away from the depths of that pain, and it's not going into learning how to live again, that's really, really when you need the professional support. Okay. But before those 2 years, it's not necessarily that you need the professional support, but you need your village of support, your loved ones and your friends, people that you trust, right? But you're expected to grieve your whole life, but the grief, again, it'll look different from pain to love.
I think here as a district, what has helped us also is, you know, here in Ed Services, we all work together. So being able to have that support of each other. Because sometimes when we lose a loved one at home, we go to work to get away. And you get so busy that you forget because you're working, you're this, you're that. But when the person that you worked with for 50, 60 hours a week, that you talk to for hours every day, is no longer there, it's like, it's hard.
It's a huge void.
It's a huge void, and it's backwards. Like normally you go to work to get away from other things and get distracted, but now you're coming to work, and that's where the void is at.
You're confronted with that loss every day. There's no escaping that.
And everything that we see has like the person's fingerprint, or like, how do they call that? Like
they've imprinted. Like they left an imprint here.
Yeah, a big one. So I guess time, we said, time and the mature part.
Yeah. Time, and then also acknowledging, like what you're doing right now, how much of an impact that she had on you personally, upon this department, upon the district, upon the public, upon the community. I mean, Dr. Dinkins was a force to be reckoned with, right? A very special individual, and you guys did have a very close relationship. And you're right, there is no escaping the obviousness of her void and the big gap that she leaves here every day until you get home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That becomes a distraction then. And then even there, it's like you still see it in one way or another. And I know as a district, my colleagues and, you know, all the leadership and the principals, the students, like, I think we're all still, you know, very much in shock. And it's kind of, you know, we're working as a district on how we move forward with her legacy, right? Because she was an amazing person. And I do believe in my heart she's no longer suffering. So that's some sort of peace for me, but we still miss her.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so I want to thank you for talking about this very difficult topic. But I wanted to talk about it because it's real. And I know many families face this every day. You know, during the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, we had a lot of our families lose loved ones.
A lot of
dads, moms, aunts, uncles that lived with them every single day. And I know that's another level.
And grandparents.
And that's another level of grief and loss. And I think you're right that it gives us a deeper reflection of who we are as people, what our priorities are, and reminding us to love our loved ones.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's what grief is. It's the reflection of a connection that is lost forever. That is exactly what encumbers grief. An indifferent person they're not going to grieve over somebody, right? And I appreciate that you guys have this, like, relationship here with all of your peers. Because even though all of you guys are grieving Dr. Deakins, it's unique to yourselves. But as a group also, you guys could come together and honor her legacy and be there for each other, right?
It's like we're grieving together. And that really helps because we know that we're not alone. And that's what she would want for us.
Yeah.
Just work together, you know, keep moving forward. And that's what she would want for us, you know. Yeah. So families, I want to remind you that if you are ever in need of any type of grief support, grief counseling, mental health services, again, this podcast is just to remind you of all the resources that we have here in Linwood Unified. We have licensed clinical social workers district-wide. We have SEL specialists. We have community school case managers. There's a lot of resources out there. And even difficult topics like this, we want to bring awareness to that. We are here to support you and guide you through this process as we heal, you know, through different situations that happen, you know, to all of us at one point or another. Any other last tips before we end today's podcast?
No, just to be gentle with yourselves and to always recognize that no matter what phase of life you're in, we are all being restored in one capacity or another. We're all working on being healed in one way or another. And just to enjoy the process. There's beautiful things that can come out of the pain, and just to show yourself mercy during that process.
Thank you, Sarah. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.